Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to The Upside. I'm Jonathan Oleski with JMOR, and this is our virtual show brought to you by the Associated Jewish Federation of Baltimore and JMOR Magazine to keep Jewish Baltimore informed during this time of uncertainty. We have a wonderful guest with us today that Scott and Beth will tell you about more in a minute. But if you have questions for the senator today, please be sure to type them into the Zoom chat or message us directly on JMOR's Facebook page. Now, I'd like to introduce our host today, Beth Goldsmith, chair of the Associated Jewish Federation of Baltimore, and Dr. Scott Rifkin, publisher of JMOR. Beth and Scott, take it away.
Thanks, Jonathan. Well, just a few weeks ago, Congress passed a sweeping $1.9 trillion COVID-19 relief bill to address the economic fallout from the pandemic. With extensive provisions that range from stimulus checks and school funding to health insurance and vaccine distribution, the bill will have far-reaching effects on our community. At the same time, vaccinations are ramping up, and President Biden announced last week that he expected to hit 200 million doses in his first 100 days in office. So how will all of this affect Marylanders? Scott, introduce our guest, please.
Great. Thank you, Beth. I appreciate it. We're thrilled to have U.S. Senator Chris Van Hollen with us today. And I want to take a minute, Chris, and we're going to talk a lot about the bill you just passed to address the pandemic. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about H.R. 1 and what's coming in that regard and what's going on in some of the southern states. But I wanted to thank you. I had a chance to have an interaction with your staff not long ago, just a typical constituent issue. Boy, were they fantastic. They really are fantastic. And I think people forget what a resource your office and other leading legislators' offices can be on basic constituent problems. So thank you for that. They were really phenomenal.
Well, Scott, it's great to be with you and Beth and Jonathan. Thank you for starting on that point, because you're right. Sometimes that aspect of the job is forgotten. And we have a terrific team in Baltimore and around the state. And, you know, we have one principle, which is when you get a call from a constituent, make sure you treat that person like they're your parent, your sibling, your loved one. And we obviously can't resolve every issue, but we do try our best to be responsive and fix every problem that we can. So thank you.
Yeah, they were great. They were great. So thank you. So let me just start off with a basic question. You just passed a massive bill to address the pandemic and the economic effects of the pandemic. What in that bill really excites you? Talk about the parts of that bill that you think are going to have huge impact.
Well, here's the thing about that bill, the American Rescue Plan. It is so big that it is hard to single out one thing, because part of the success of this bill is going to be addressing all parts of this challenge. And there are three big pieces to this. One is help to people who are in need right now, who are hurting, people who have lost their jobs because of the pandemic. Then there's help for small businesses that have been really jammed because of the pandemic. Then there's help for the city of Baltimore and state and local government. And then there's more resources to defeat COVID-19. But Scott, I guess there's one thing that's gotten some attention. It is the expanded child tax credit. And if we make this child tax credit permanent, we raised it to $3,000 per child, $3,600 per child under 6. The idea is to provide, families with kids with a little additional income so that they can meet all the needs of the family. If we make this permanent, we will lift over 52,000 Maryland kids out of poverty, and we would cut child poverty in the United States in half. Obviously, we need to do the second half, but that would be a big step forward. And so that's one of the things in this bill that excites me.
This bill was not just a pandemic bill. It was a social bill in a lot of ways, because you guys took the opportunity to address some really unaddressed social issues. Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement. I'd say two things. One, we did target the funds to families and workers who were most harmed by the pandemic. But we also do provide resources to make sure that as we defeat this pandemic, and we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, we want to make sure we have a robust recovery. And what the folks at the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office told us was that if we didn't do something like this, if we didn't do anything more this year, that we would be living with much higher levels of unemployment in the United States until the year 2025. And we didn't want that to happen. And so, yes, part of this is to meet a lot of unmet needs, but also to give us a boost as we get out of this pandemic.
Nice to have the combination of a presidency and a Congress that actually cares. If the last few years, to see an aggressive attempt to solve these problems together is really very nice. So thank you for being part of that.
Well, thank you. And, I wish we, as President Biden said, we wish we had more bipartisan support for the American Rescue Plan. We wish we'd had Republican partners, but the priority was to get something done that needed to be done. And I look forward to continue find opportunities to work with our Republican colleagues, but we couldn't wait. I mean, this was an emergency. This was a badly needed bill, and we needed to move forward and get it done, and we did. And it's outside of Congress, it is popular among Republicans, Democrats, and independents. I think the country recognizes that we needed to do this.
Very good.
Hey, I'm jumping in. Thank you. It's great to see you again, Senator Van Hollen. I'm a former teacher. I like to say there's no such thing. It's a personality type, not actually an occupation. So I'm still a teacher, and I guess always will be. So I'd love to talk about schools. About $130 billion in this plan is earmarked for schools. And can you give us a little information about the timetable and what exactly it'll be used for?
Sure, you're right. There's lots of funds that come directly to school systems, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, other school systems. So the idea is, first of all, to provide schools the support they need during these difficult times, but also the goal is to get our kids back in the classroom as quickly as possible, as safely as possible. And so these funds can be used for a variety of purposes, whether it needs to be, schools need to be retrofitted in any way to accommodate some of the social distancing requirements, although as you saw, the CDC just reduced those for kids in school from 6 feet to 3 feet. So we are making progress here. I will say that because we are still having a fair amount of distance learning, or at least hybrid learning, we also provided $7 billion in what's called the E-rate fund. This is a fund under the Federal Communications Commission to better connect students through the internet to learning, because we have to deal with the digital divide in this country. This is an important down payment in that direction. But the funds for schools are designed to get them back open as soon as possible, as safely as possible.
So let's talk a little bit about small business. We have about anywhere from 3,000 to 6,000 people that may see this show on YouTube, on Facebook, on all kinds of, it's funny, the world of media has changed. 100 people might be listening now, but by the end of next week, we'll see a couple of thousand people watch the program. And so it's kind of neat. We have a lot of small business owners. The Jewish community is full of small business owners. Talk about what this bill did for restaurants and small businesses.
Yeah, Scott, thanks for asking that, because this has been a ongoing challenge, and also a success story, right? About a year ago, we passed the CARES Act, and that included the new PPP program, Paycheck Protection Program, as well as an emergency loan program. Those programs had some, a little bit of a rocky start, but we've dramatically improved them over the year. And I really want to salute my friend and colleague, Senator Ben Cardin, who has been very involved in this as the, first the ranking member, and starting this year, the chair of the Small Business Administration. But these funds are very targeted to provide help to small businesses, and they are, in many cases, are up to $100,000. These are forgivable loans, and you can forgive more of them if you, meet the criteria. Emergency loan program has also now been targeted much more to very small businesses. I cannot agree with you more. The sort of the lifeblood of our communities in terms of the dynamism of our economy is based on small businesses. And so the idea is to help them through this period of time. You also mentioned restaurants. In the American Rescue Plan, there's a whole special section dealing with restaurants, since they were, of course, especially hard hit. So I encourage any small business owners or participants that are listening, please contact our office and Senator Cardin's office. We're happy to walk you through how you can benefit from these funds.
That's really great to hear, because I was going to ask you, and if there's a way other than having to bother you, let us know. What about the rental assistance for those people who need that? How do they make that happen, and who do they contact?
Right. So the rental assistance fund, and we first did this in the bipartisan bill we passed in December. And then we doubled the amount in the American Rescue Plan. Those funds are going directly to the Baltimore City, Baltimore County government. And there are guidelines, but within those guidelines, they're quite flexible. And those local governments are supposed to set up the systems to make sure that those rental assistance payments go to those who need it the most. And the way it's set up is the payments will be sent directly to the landlords for those eligible tenants, those eligible renters. So, the city, the county will develop the system based on the guidelines in the bill for determining who's eligible for rental assistance. And then they will send those payments. Of course, the whole idea is to make sure that as we reach the end of the eviction moratorium, that we don't have, families that have these huge balloon payments. And huge evictions that we want to make sure that we avoid. And also a lot of the landlords are not these mega corporations. A lot of the landlords have their bills to pay too. So this helps, of course, the renters stay in their homes and helps landlords payments to their creditors.
I apologize. I hit the mute for a second because somebody's ringing my front doorbell. That's the way of the world these days, unfortunately. So let's talk a little bit about vaccine distribution and vaccine willingness. I'm a physician, and people say to me, they go, well, I'm not going to take the vaccine. I don't trust it, or I haven't been able to do my homework on it yet. And I always look at them, I say, wait, I have a medical degree and I'm not qualified to do that homework. That's what we have the CDC for. That's what we have Anthony Fauci for. That's what we have experts for. Listen to them, take the vaccine. This bill addresses distribution. Does it do anything also to address the public relations piece that's needed to get folks to take the vaccine?
Yes, it does. It provides resources to go to county health departments, state health departments for the purpose of trying to get these messages out. As you know, Scott, the key is, not only to do, public service announcements on radio and TV, although that's important. It's really essential that we get those messages into trusted partners into communities. And one of the big issues, as you just said, has been the take up of the vaccine. Part of it is, though, that the vaccine has not gotten to where it should be in communities that have been hardest hit, mostly communities of color, the African American community, Latino community. So it needs to be much better distributed to reach those communities, but also trusted voices in those communities have to be, ones that are heard. And so these resources are designed to help organize that effort, even as we try to do more to get the vaccines into people's arms. And unfortunately, the Maryland state rollout was very, very rocky when it came to the distribution of these vaccines, at least according to the CDC data.
Yeah, what's interesting to me, and you probably get much better briefings than we get as the public, is it really looks like the rate of vaccination is ramping up very quickly, that the availability is ramping up very quickly, and the administration is doing a really nice job of making that happen. Is that your assessment as well?
Right. No, the Biden administration has made this a priority. They immediately did a number of things. They made full use of what's called the Defense Production Act, which allows the federal government to really engage the private sector when it comes to a national emergency to develop more of the all the components of the response, which includes, of course, vaccine, but also syringes, right? You need everything in that supply chain to come together just right to be able to deliver the vaccine into somebody's arms. But yes, they've dramatically ramped up the vaccine supply. And the other thing they've done, Scott, is more of that federal vaccine is being directly channeled, for example, into community health centers in the Baltimore City, Baltimore County, other parts of the state. So we've been able to do a little bit of end run over some of the state bottlenecks that had been created.
And are they working with the churches in the city? I mean, those churches can be such a powerful impact.
Yes, that's been key, and that's where the county and the city health department have been really so focused in their efforts, and that's why. In my view, more of the vaccine should have been going through those city and county health departments because they are very focused on those communities. But it's also one reason the Biden administration decided to channel federal vaccine supplies directly to community health centers. They're working with churches. We now have mobile systems working with FEMA so that people can drive the vaccine into neighborhoods that have been hardest hit, because not everybody has the ability to have that transportation linked to some of these mass vaccination sites. So the idea is to do mass vaccination sites, but also through churches and other trusted local sources to get the vaccine more locally.
Now, I'm going to throw in also synagogues because it is, has been an issue actually in the Jewish community as well, vaccine reluctance particularly. And so I think we mentioned it on a previous show. I don't know. I attend so many meetings. I know I've spoken about it. The health department actually reached out to the Associated, and we applied for a grant and were given one and have someone now hired on a temporary basis to do that education. And we are engaging rabbis and synagogues as well, Scott. So the faith-based community in all ways can be extremely helpful to this effort.
Well, that's a good point, Beth. I think that, again, if you want to make sure that trusted places and trusted voices are the ones communicating to people about the need to get the vaccine. And so that's essential. In fact, within, I don't know exactly when the inflection point will be, but we are getting close within a number of weeks to that point where the overall supply of the vaccine actually exceeds demand. Right now, we're still very much in a world where demand exceeds supply, but then we're going to really need to ramp up our efforts to reach those individuals who have been reluctant for whatever reason to get the vaccine. Because as we saw, the report just came out yesterday, and it shows huge effectiveness. 90% effectiveness for people who have received 2 of the Moderna and Pfizer shots, 80% with just 1 shot. Nobody who's gotten those shots had been hospitalized. It is very effective, much more so. Scott, you're a doctor, much more so than the regular seasonal flu vaccines.
And much more than anybody expected. It's really pretty remarkable.
But speaking of that, can I just finish the thought?
Sure.
What about with the variants and, that we don't know longitudinally, in terms of studying, What about boosters? Is the government thinking about, can we look forward to funding of booster shots for all of us as time, elapses and we need them?
So short answer is yes. In the American Rescue Plan that we just passed, there are also substantial resources to really try and stay on top of these variants, which not only requires the research, but also the ability to quickly test people to see if new variants are emerging in any place. But it also speaks, of course, to the importance of getting more people vaccinated as quickly as possible so that we can vaccinate with faster than the variants can, produce themselves.
So prior to this pandemic, Bill Gates and just a few other people were running around the country saying we ought to be really worried about pandemic. But for the most part, the public health world said we got bigger fish to fry right now. And yet we got sort of caught with our pants down as a society. The world did. I mean, not just the United States. Where's the next step? How do we start looking at the early surveillance, early treatment, having equipment stockpiled? Because it happened once every 100 years, but with populations increasing and density of population increasing, the risk goes up. So what is
Right.
the do now?
Yeah. Well, coincidentally, I just got off a Zoom conference meeting with the Johns Hopkins put together on exactly this issue, at least as it related to the supply chain part. So you're absolutely right. We need to be much better prepared. That starts with the early detection systems. And unfortunately, as I think we learned, the previous administration dismantled the unit in the White House that had been there, whose main purpose had been to be on the lookout for pandemics, and also reduced some of our CDC capacity on the front lines in places like China. So we need to beef up the early warning system. We also need to recognize that, things like deforestation and climate change also lead to the potential greater transmission from the animal world to the human world. So that piece we got to deal with. Then we got to make sure we stockpile and have a robust stockpile. And of course, we can't just plan on another COVID-19. We have to, you have to not just plan for the last war, the one we're fighting now, but what may come at us in the future. And finally, that link with the supply chain, whether it's on the pharmaceutical side or it's on medical equipment, masks, whatever it may be, we need to, and we are, President Biden has established a 100-day sort of work group to develop recommendations for what we need to do on supply chain security, how much of that we need to bring back home, back onshore, some of that. But you're right, that has, as we get through this, we got to be ready for whatever's thrown at us next and be much better prepared.
So one of the lessons we learned was that the nursing home population was tremendously vulnerable. Where there are less than 1% of the population, but they were 30% of the deaths. So those numbers aren't accurate, but you get the general idea. What do we do for early surveillance in that population? Because the manual way that data is being moved isn't going to work in the long run. Is that something that the Congress look at? I don't know. That's a seat answer that I should be asking the head of the CDC. So I apologize. But is it something that the Congress ought to be looking at?
Well, I think we have, this is part of the quick, the lessons learned here. And as you know, the CDC has surveillance mechanisms to try to, detect diseases early wherever they may, emerge in the country or even in the world with respect to their overseas operations. But I do think given the vulnerability of senior citizens, to disease, it does make sense to focus more attention than we have on surveillance of disease in nursing homes.
Very good.
Senator, I have a Facebook question for you from one of our audience members. And this is a state question, but let's give this a shot. So Rochelle here on Facebook wants to know, why is Maryland opening up when numbers are rising? Any thoughts on that?
Well, this is a big challenge, right? On the one, the bottom line is we need to pay attention to the public health experts and the data. And, we're trying to do two things at once. We're trying to vaccinate the population, as we also urge them, as the CDC director just said very emotionally yesterday, to continue to apply the social distancing practices, wear masks. And the problem we've got is a lot of people are not, as we try to open up, and I support the idea of trying to open up safely. But when we do that, people have got to continue to observe the CDC recommendations on masking and social distancing. And we're seeing a lot of people not following those guidelines. So it's going to be very important that the state health officials, the governor and others make their decisions based on the data. And if what we're seeing is increased cases and hospitalizations, they may have to, adjust some of their recommendations regarding opening. This is why getting that vaccine out is so important, because that is obviously the best way to address this issue.
Thank you.
So let me change the topic completely, if you don't mind. Nobody had a closer look at what was going on was it January 6th, when a mob was descending on the Capitol and tearing into the building and really acting in a way that is not compatible with democracy. And now all through the South, particularly, we have a move to disenfranchise people from the voting rolls, because the feeling is that amongst conservatives is those kind of voters that would be disenfranchised are going to be Democratic voters. Talk about that issue. I mean, it seems like we're moving back towards Jim Crow all of a sudden.
This is a national scandal, what's happening in a lot of these state legislatures. And it does go back to, the awful attacks of January 6th. And before that, of course, the big lie that was spread by the former president after the election. And, whether you're a Republican, Democrat, or independent listening, the reality is that, Joe Biden won, as members of the Trump administration said, from the former attorney general to the person who was in charge of elections in the Department of Homeland Security. There was no fraud in this election, nothing of any significance. And, Biden-Harris won fair and square. But because of the big lie, you've got these state legislatures, especially where they're Republican controlled, beginning to put up barriers to voting and designing barriers in a way to disenfranchise African-American voters and younger voters. And so a lot of the requirements being put up are requirements that would have a disproportionate impact on those populations. Our democracy is based on the idea you go out, you make your argument, you have your agenda, and you try and win by addition, right? You try to win by persuading more people to vote for you based on your ideas and your platform. This is an attempt, as you said, to try to win by subtraction. This is by trying to put up barriers to people voting, which is just totally un-American and undemocratic. This is why we're trying to pass a bill, a big bill called the For the People Act in Congress, that would establish some minimum national standards that protect people's right to vote, certain amount of time for early voting, allowing absentee voting, but with protections, because we need a national standard, because we see so many of these states now trying to essentially put up roadblocks to people's democratic rights, small d.
In Georgia, where they have primaries in June in the hot summer, and where they don't have enough polling sites, and you've got little old ladies who are going to stand in line for 3 hours to vote, they've passed a rule that you can't bring them water.
Yeah.
I mean, is that incredible?
Yeah. So look, we know exactly what the purposes are here. There was right after the Supreme Court struck down the Voting Rights Act. This was back in 2013. You saw a lot of these states that used to have to run their voting law changes through the U.S. Department of Justice, the Supreme Court knocked that requirement out. And, North Carolina, for example, put up barriers that when the courts looked at it, when the Court of Appeals for the Fourth District looked at that, they said that they were designed to prevent African Americans from getting to the polls. In Georgia, we know that was their intent because one of the earlier bills said they were going to block Sunday voting. And we know that in the African American community, there's a program, Souls to the Polls. Well, they had to back down on that because it was so obvious. But if you look at all the other pieces, they're also designed to do the same thing. And they looked at Georgia in the last election. They looked at those precincts where you had much longer lines. And the much longer lines, people having to wait hours, were in the black precincts, the predominantly black precincts. In the white precincts, much shorter lines. So when you say you can't bring any food and water to somebody in line, you also know what they're targeting.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in. I'm going to jump in, Scott. I'm really only because I do know that the senator has a hard stop to go on with other business. And I would just say that I loved your description of, winning by addition, by talking to people. I think that's our upside comment, to talk about that. That's what it should certainly be about, is allowing access to more people and then letting more people decide what they want this country to look like. So really, really appreciate your time here with us today, Senator Van Hollen. We know, and I can just tell our audience, so stay tuned. This bill, the voting rights bill, whatever we are calling it, what did you say it was called?
This is there too. This is called the For the People Act, and John Sarbanes, Congressman Sarbanes, has been very involved in the part we didn't talk about, which is the campaign finance reform. I've been very involved in a part of it to get rid of secret money in politics, so that voters know who is spending hundreds of millions of dollars behind those, nice sounding names like, the Campaign for a Better Future. People should know. So it contains a lot of elements, but on this issue, in terms of access, it creates a minimum national standard so that, as you just said, as we said, people, we have a vibrant democracy. Get out there and make your case, and then let people vote.
Well, I love it. And thank you. So I'm going to tell our audience to please pay attention to the For the People Act and to what's going on in Congress right now and these discussions. Very, very important, obviously historic times. So thank you again, Senator, for being here with us today. And to our audience, I'm sorry. Did you want to have a final word?
No, I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you. It's great to be with you. Look forward to continuing the conversation.
Yes, us too. Thanks so much. And next week, for everyone watching, and please tell your friends to watch, we are going to be talking about baseball, because believe it or not, the season begins on Thursday. So on April 6th, next Tuesday, we'll be hearing from Stan the Fan Charles, who will talk about the Orioles and the upcoming season. And in the meantime, as I always recommend, please visit associated.org and jmoreliving.com for more information, stories, and resources, and sign up for the weekly newsletter. I hope everyone is having and continues to have a happy Passover. And until we meet again, stay well.